Whenever I was the chief executive of the Child Exploitation Online Protection Centre, I used to walk into work from where I lived in London every day. And I would walk past this address, 61 Pimlico. I didn't realise that the person that had lived there was Henry Healer, a photographer. I also didn't realise that Henry had been raided by the Metropolitan Police and that 132,000 indecent images, many rumoured to be of 12-year-old twins, had been recovered. And the reason that I begin with a story like this isn't because 132,000 indecent images of children is a lot to be harvested from a predator. Isn't because Henry Healer was in London or the fact that he ran a photography studio. It's because Henry Healer was raided by the Metropolitan Police in London in 1874, before the internet was a glimpse in anybody's eye. 1874, and what does this tell us? That actually the risk that our children face isn't from the technology itself. This is about the nature of the beast. It's the person who will use the technology of the day in any way they can to capture that upon which they're focused, so that they can turn it into a commodity and share it, or so they can revisit it at different times and places to satisfy their own deviant sexual needs. So Henry Healer puts in context, I think, the fact that this is about people and behavior more than the technology that can be used and abused. But technology is a funny thing, and many of us are fundamentally seduced by it because we don't understand it, because most of us can't code. But technology, in essence, is neutral. If you take the room that we're in today, it was fundamentally neutral when it was empty. But once you fill that room or that space, online or offline, with people, the risk is defined by the character of those individuals in the room. And I've offended people in many places and spaces whilst I've said this. One of them, I was invited a number of years ago to the Vatican to speak at Santa Marta, the Pope's residence, to the World Congress of English Cardinals. And I remember on the day being so proud and pleased to have been invited that I brought my wife with me. And she sat at the back of the room whilst I spoke to the religious and the faithful. And I could see as I went into this bit about the room is just like the internet. The risk is defined by the people in it. I could see her beginning to shake her head. And if you've ever seen that scene from The Omen, is it where the head begins to spin round? The further I got into it, the more I realized that her head was about to fall off. Because she knew that what I would normally say in a room of a reasonable number, and there certainly was a reasonable number there, that we need to remember that people lie. That is the nature of the beast. People lie. They want to present themselves, in the way they want you to see them, not in the way they necessarily are. So in a room of any given number, I would say, there are people who lie, there are people who cheat, and there are people who steal. In a room of any given number, there are likely to be people who hang their fiddle at the door. The person who's all singing and all dancing outside, the fellow well met, everybody else's friend, but when he gets home, he rules his house through coercive control. There's likely to be someone like that in this room today. And of course, this is the bit where the head hit the floor and rolled to the front when I said, and in a room filled with ostensibly good people, people that we think are good because of the robe of office they wear or the rank that they hold, there's likely to be someone with a deviant sexual interest in children. And I heard the thud of her head hit the floor as it ran towards the front. And the truth is, many people took that challenge in the way it was meant. And as I said there, if you believe that the person next to you, because of who they are and what they represent, is too good, and that they could never represent a risk to children, then don't ever become involved in safeguarding children, because you cannot tell by looking. You literally cannot tell by looking. On many occasions when I'd have gone onto the TV to talk about a predator who'd been arrested, my youngest daughter, who's a social worker, would have said to me, "Dad, watching you on the TV, I think you look more like a predator than he did." She's getting married next year, and I'm holding the reception for her in McDonald's car park in Lisburn. But the truth is this. We are seduced by technology. And when I go into schools, or if we talk to teachers or safeguarding professionals, and I bring up a slide and say, okay, now who is the smartest person in the room right now? Everyone says Google. Everyone says Google is the smartest person in the room. And when it comes to safeguarding children, I ask Google this question. Why are my parents getting divorced? And you know what? Neither Google nor Bing nor any other search engine can answer that question. Because when it comes to safeguarding children, context is key. Context is key. And you know what? The school crossing patrol, the man or the woman who stands and holds the traffic while children cross the road on a busy day to make sure they're safe, they do context better than Google. They see the child that walks across the road skipping. They see the child who is happy, who is worry-free. And then they see the context has changed in that child's life as they walk across the road with the weight of the world on their shoulders, as they drag their school bag across that road. Their body language, their demeanor has all changed. Context is critical in this world. You do that better than Google. And don't ever allow anyone to make you think that technology is better than you when it comes to making people safer. Now, the government in the UK have launched a consultation about online harms. And we've talked about, all of the harms that can befall our children in this fabulous online space, because I don't want to demonize it. This space presents opportunity to educate and empower in places and spaces that you could never have imagined being able to reach out to before, to make sure that children living in the depths of poverty are able to access information, and that information will fuel the opportunities in their lives. But in essence, we've got to look seriously at online harms. But to begin there by simply demonizing the technology is wrong. If you want to understand online harms, understand that they will have offline roots. And we talk about context. The number one reason children phone Childline for help when they're desperate is mental health, low self-esteem. They don't feel good about who they are. The number two reason is because they're unhappy at home. Well, no wonder children can be dragged from home by predators if they're unhappy. No wonder children can be seduced and groomed, radicalized, gang affiliated, or groomed because they have low self-esteem. Those children are cannon fodder to the predator. And understanding that being unhappy at home, being neglected sexually, physically, or emotionally abused sets a context. Domestic violence and abusive relationships in a house sets a context where some young people accept the way they're being treated. Accept it. And some young people and some young men expect to be able to behave in a particular way that is simply unacceptable. And when you bombard young people with the advertising we do, when we create this, approach where everyone wants to celebritize their lives, reality TV, the adverts that young people see, the lyrics of songs, we're conditioning them to normalize that which is not truly normal for them at that early age. And we're exposing them to that. And when those children who are isolated or alienated, who have no friends on a Wednesday because they fell out with them in school on a Monday, when they go online, they open up pathways to harm. And those pathways can accelerate their journey to something terrible happening to them. And we need to do what we can. So I've learned lessons over many years. I used to say in the aftermath of some investigations that actually I've made mistakes. And then the PR person, the communications person would pull me into the room and say, stop saying you've made mistakes, say you've learned lessons. So from the mistakes I've made, I've learned a number of lessons. The first harsh lesson for me was this: recognizing that my own ego was my biggest problem. So I went up through the ranks in police very, very quickly. I went into Special Branch in Northern Ireland, which should divide the audience pretty evenly, 50-50. And then I moved to England, where I was an Assistant Chief Constable and then Deputy Director General of the National Crime Squad, dealing with serious and organised crime. I was on a trajectory, and I cared about what next. And then I was offered the opportunity to set up the Child Exploitation Online Protection Centre. And you know what? I didn't really want it. Because I felt, and my friends all reassured me that I was right, that I was much too important to leave those big jobs around counter-terrorism and organised crime to look at child protection. And you know what? I was sent out on a trip to speak at an event in Cambodia, in Phnom Penh. Whilst I was there, I was taken out in the field to Steng Menshi, a municipal dump. And whilst there, I met this child. And this child was recovered by a charity on the ground that day and taken back to their facility. But as I stood in the dump in Stingmenshi, that's a humbling experience where you can buy one of these children for dollars. You can use and abuse them and dump them on the street like a piece of garbage. As you stood there, you feel humbled. You feel ashamed of your own ego and how you prioritize things in your own life, especially when you have your own children who you love, and they grew up in an environment which is much safer and much better. When I was returning from Cambodia, I got on the plane, and as someone who's not that bright, I carry a book called Passing Time on the Loo. And it's really good if you ever want to pretend that you're much cleverer than you actually are. And sitting on that plane coming back with this experience in the forefront of my mind, I opened the page, and call it providence, call it fate, call it what you want. I found this poem which said, I spent an hour with laughter, she chatted all the way, but I barely remember a single thing from what she had to say. I then spent an hour with sorrow, and ne'er a word said she, but oh, the things I learned the day that sorrow walked with me. And you know what? For me, that was my road to Damascus. That was me turning left instead of right. That was me thinking, this is an opportunity to grasp. This is something you can do that actually makes a difference. So I learned that lesson about myself. And I think we all need to reflect on what we do and why we do it and how we do it. When it comes to the social media companies, it's easy to name and shame, and we do it all the time. Government do it because it's the easy response, because it costs them nothing. These are businesses. You know, you may not recognize all of the apps up there. One of them is called Facetune, my own particular favorite, because if you don't like the way you look, you can actually use this app, and it will make you look much better. I tried to use it one day, but the owners have contacted me to say the server went down for 4 days, so I'm never to do it again. But all of these apps have some things in common. They're about streaming, live streaming. They're about broadcasting ourselves. They're about creating an image that we want people to think is us. And they are businesses. So if we want them to sit up and take notice, what I believe is this: you need to kick them in the wallet. That's the only way you make a business take notice, impact their bottom line. So if you were going to book a hotel tonight and you went to TripAdvisor, would you go to one with 1 star? If you're going out for a meal with a friend or your partner, would you go somewhere that had a 1-star hygiene rating? You wouldn't. We need to think in a different way about online harms and how we influence the internet businesses. So they make the vast amount of their money through click-through advertising. So we need to create a global approach to rating those sites which are ethical, those sites which are safe for our children. They need to have these logos on them, and if they're not safe, we need to punish advertisers who participate in unethical advertising. Would you advertise in a brothel? Would you advertise where you knew people were being trafficked because there were high volumes of people in that space? Of course you wouldn't. This should be no different, and we need to be radical, and we need to influence the people that run the social networking companies to behave differently. The information superhighway, we talked about it for years. And you know what? It's like the Wild West. Because as a predator, if I go online, I don't believe I'm going to be caught. I don't believe I'm going to be caught. We need to introduce the concept of deterrence into this online space. If you're driving along this road, you're not going to think about speed. But if you see this sign appear, this picture of a speed camera, not an actual speed camera, you put your foot in the brake and you think, where am I, what am I doing, and what are the consequences likely to be? Governments need to invest. Arrests won't solve this. But we need to create an active deterrent. We need to see more people held to account for the brutality they inflict on our children. And ultimately, let me say this. We need to reflect on who we are, what we do, and why we do it. We need to reflect on how we can be more imaginative when we engage with the online industry and push them to be better. We need to recognize the opportunities that we have to push government to be stronger. Because lots of the risks our children face, they face offline as well as online. And you know what? Christmas is coming, and if you want your child to grow up to be a misogynist, my recommendation is Grand Theft Auto. Professor Andy Phippen carried out a study where he interviewed a load of young kids, and it was either a 5-year-old or 7-year-old said, I like playing it because you can rape people. A 9-year-old in his Christmas wish list to Santa actually said, I'd like Grand Theft Auto 5, please. And reassuring Santa, he said, I just want to play with the cars, not the hookers. If you want to normalize that which is abnormal, if you want young people to grow up with distorted views, then you allow them to have that. Leadership is important. One of my favorite leadership stories relates to an American colonel, lieutenant colonel, who brought together the young men and women that he was sending out into mortal combat, the first ever airborne deployment into Vietnam in battle. It doesn't matter where the battle was or what the politics was, but he brought those young men and women together, and he stood at the front with their families behind him, and he said, "I cannot promise to bring you all back alive, but I can promise you this. I will be the first to set foot on the battlefield, and I will be the last to step off." Hal Moore was not a great leader because he mastered rhetoric. Any fool can do that, and you've just seen one do it. He was a great leader because he was the first to set foot on the field, and he was the very last to step off. Each of us, whether we're a parent, whether we're a carer, whether we work in education or technology, whether we're in the police or social care, we have the opportunity every day in our lives to be on that field. All you need to do is understand what to look for and what to do if you think you've seen it. Because actually, you, at the right time, in the wrong place in a child's life, can make all the difference. You can help them turn left instead of right. And if you do that, you'll have created a legacy that money simply cannot buy. Thank you for your time, and good luck.